Welcome to Left, East to West with me, Tom Parkin.
And me, Nikki Hill. I'm really looking forward to our discussion today, Tom, with Shauna Sylvester. Shauna is the Senior Fellow of the Definity Foundation, founder and lead convener of the Urban Climate Leadership, a project of Makeway. And she has a really impressive career as a convener and a policy leader, not just here in BC, but across the country and globally. So really looking forward to the conversation at this critical time. And she's the former executive director at the SFU Mosque J. Wask Center for Dialogue, the Urban Sustainability Directors Network for U.S. and Canada, and the co-founder of several local and international initiatives.
And she ran for Vancouver mayor in
She
2018,
did.
right? So we'll
Yeah.
talk about that mix with municipal government, which is timely because we have municipal elections in many provinces, BC, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, Ontario, and Prince Edward Island this fall. So
Yeah.
that mix of municipal and environmental connects with our This Week Under the Fold theme for this show. First, we're going to have a check-in with Saman Tapasinajad about the work of Progress Toronto, the civic movement boosting progressive candidates in Toronto's municipal elections coming up. And then Desmond Cole, who's been covering the Smith-Carney MOU for The Breach.
Yeah, some great interviews to add in today. But not just ending today. So reminding you of some really interesting people joining us for episodes in June because somehow it is June. So first up with Stefan Löfven, the former Social Democrat Prime Minister of Sweden. So big interview there with Tom next week. Jim Stanford, a really well-known Canadian economist we've been waiting to get on the show for a while. And Carla Beck, the leader of the Saskatchewan NDP. So you can hear us on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, whatever you're listening to. Tap that follow button so you'll see Left, East to West episodes as they pop up on Mondays, and you can remember to check them out. We have Shauna Sylvester coming up shortly, but first, let's do This Week Below the Fold, tracking a couple of important news stories that didn't make national headlines. There are municipal elections across a number of provinces this year, including Ontario. And a key race, of course, will be in Toronto, where Mayor Olivia Chow officially launched her re-election bid last Monday.
Yeah, important race. And for an on-the-ground look, I connected with a friend, Taman Sabajinjad, Executive Director of Progress Toronto. Welcome to Left, East to West, Saman. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah. Mayor Chow launched her re-election saying lots has been done and lots left to do. What have been the important changes you've seen, and what are the steps ahead she's seeking a mandate for?
Yeah, so Progress Toronto, we supported Chow in 2023. We helped elect her alongside 6 other city councilors since 2022. And we've seen some really important movements on issues that Progress Toronto has been campaigning on alongside tens of thousands of people since our inception in 2018. So we've been around since then, and we've been campaigning on things like affordable housing, transit, investments in services, and there have been really great changes, right? We're seeing 7 days a week open libraries. We're seeing that there's more investment like in services, more rec programs. There's the Toronto Crisis Response program that's been expanded to the whole city. There's like way more investment in building affordable housing by the city, but also in buying up existing affordable housing that's at risk of being converted into luxury condos. So there's been a lot done, but there's still a lot more to do. Like we are in a crisis, and that is after we've had 13 years of conservative rule. The affordability crisis that we're experiencing today was not created obviously by this administration that's been around for 2.5 years. And there's a lot more to do. Like these last 2.5 years have really been how do we um, kind of move this ship towards like a better path. However, there's a lot more to be done, right? We need to build more affordable housing. We need to reinvest in those services that for so long have been cut and underfunded. We need to bring contract back in a lot of this the services that have been contracted out, like snow clearing, like garbage collection,
Mhm.
um, and a lot of those wasteful contracts that lead that don't serve the public well, and they don't serve workers well. So,
Mhm.
um,
Yeah, you guys
there's
have
I
been
can
around.
imagine that the mayor has a lot.
Yeah, Progress Toronto has been around, as you say, for now 8 years. But there seem to be several groups on the right of the spectrum suddenly popping up. What do you make of that? And how do you think Progress Toronto differs in the way that you do organizing?
Yeah, I find it a little bit of a compliment, the more the merrier. They see that we have been effective.
Hmm.
But Progress Shuttle is not just like me. I'm a very small part of the organization. There we have an amazing staff team, but we also, what the most important part of our group, our organization, is really like our thousands of volunteers who are out door knocking every single day.
Yeah.
I haven't seen those others groups really mobilize people in the same way. Um I think that they think that we're just or they think that they just can be on like present
Yeah.
online to kind
They're
of have the
influencers.
impact that we do.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess
And
that's
you're
I would
door
say in
knockers. I
some
mean,
ways.
yeah.
Yeah. And our work is really powered. Like we're out 6, 7, 8 times a week, knocking on doors, speaking to thousands of people on the ground.
Mm-hmm.
Those volunteers reach tens of thousands of people, or hundreds of thousands of people. And so when we get into the election, when like Progress Toronto decides to support candidates or oppose candidates, we have a very tight budget of just $25,000.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and as progressives, we know how to stretch a dollar. We're very prudent in our fiscal management. And we're only really able to do that because we print out all our flyers in the office on our printer. Those flyers get cut, counted, and bundled and delivered door to door. We're just talking about tens of thousands of people who receive
Mm-hmm.
these flyers. Um, by volunteers. And that
Yep.
volunteer energy is what is able to deliver those wins that we've seen. Not only the 6 city councilors plus the mayor that we've helped elect, but also we defeated Anthony Fury. We defeated
Yeah.
Brad Bradford in the last election, Mark Saunders. We defeated also Mark Grimes in 2022.
Yeah, Simon, in Ontario, generally the mayor is the agenda setter and one vote on council, not a kind of CEO mayor. So you have 25 ward campaigns each one of them really matters to win a progressive council. How important is it to Progress Toronto to have a progressive running for mayor, shaping the overall election narrative?
Yeah, so I would say that's one factor in it, but locally,
Hmm.
there's a lot of components to it, right? How
Hmm.
strong your volunteer base is, how many people, how deep is your connection to the community? So oftentimes, like an incumbent advantage is very real, and so Progress
Hmm.
Toronto really gets involved in those races where we know we can give a strategic edge to counselors or candidates,
Hmm.
and so that's what we'll be looking for in the fall, and we are looking to elect a progressive majority so we can have more of those ambitious wins, because the reality is Olivia Chow has been governing with John Tory's city council, and this is an opportunity to make council more progressive and have a
Hmm.
progressive majority.
Yeah. Okay. Well, good work for it. Saman, thank you so much for joining. And what day
Thanks for
is
having me.
Ontario? What day is the municipal voting in Ontario this year?
It's on October 26th, approximately
All right.
150 days away.
Okay. All right. You got it. So we got that date circled, and hopefully we can talk again before then and catch up on how the campaigns are shaping up. Thanks very much. Take care.
All right, thank you.
Really interesting that others are trying to look like Progress Toronto here,
Mhm.
but they're more like influencer groups than volunteers doing some of the doorstep conversations Progress Toronto has been known for.
Yeah, Progress Toronto's built a real volunteer base across the city, and they also know where they're fighting. So what wards. So that's valuable.
For sure. And you're tracking a second story this week. I think a lot of people were tracking this one in
Yeah.
the last couple of weeks, especially here in BC. So that's that memo of understanding between Mark Carney and Danielle Smith, which wasn't at all under the fold, but the details about the deal really are.
Yeah, and I thought it was really urgent to get under the fold on this kind of sprawling story, and someone who's great at really crunching stories down to their core points is Desmond Cole, probably best known for being an author. but also someone covering this MOU for the breach. Desmond Cole, thank you for joining us. Welcome to Left East to West.
Yeah, my pleasure, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Way back when, there was a grand bargain between Ottawa, Alberta, and the oil and gas companies. Yeah, there was going to be a new pipeline approval, but also consumer and industrial carbon taxes, a North Pacific tanker ban, and an emissions cap. But the CEOs reneged, and we just watched the final capitulation. What was new in this agreement between Smith and Carney that we've seen, that we saw last month?
So the biggest change is, of course, to the price of carbon, the charge that industrial emitters are expected to pay per ton of emissions. And if you go back to 2021, the Justin Trudeau Liberals had this document called A Healthy Environment and a Healthy Economy. It was a climate plan. And in this plan, their goal was to get to a price on a carbon charge of $170 by 2030. If we look at Mark Carney's plan now, it is calling for a price of $130 by 2030. So that's actually like a 28% reduction.
Mm-hmm.
And the problem with it, if you ask, the David Suzuki Foundation, or if you ask the Canadian Climate Institute, is that it's just not going to give enough of an incentive to these polluters to build up the Pathways carbon capture and storage program that they've promised to do in exchange for getting this pipeline. There's just not enough of a penalty on them to do so. I think that's the biggest kind of new thing that's come out of this. I think it's also important to note. Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Well, just take us into that for a sec, because that carbon capture and storage idea, the Pathways plan, was kind of premised on having an industrial carbon tax at a rate that would make investing in that project seem like a good business plan. Is that now gone? What's your sense of that?
I would say just not gone, but significantly weakened. The balance is off. We have climate targets, emissions reduction targets that we have agreed to under the Paris Climate Agreement. And we can only reach those targets by 2050 with a quite aggressive, way more aggressive plan than we have had. We haven't been meeting our targets for most of the time up until now that we signed that agreement. We started getting a little bit back on track in the last couple of years. But we're nowhere near. Net zero by 2050 means that Canada actually takes out of the atmosphere and out of industry the same amount of carbon as we're producing. We have absolutely no chance to get there with this plan. And so there are still penalties and there are still incentives, but they're off. I think it's also important to note that there's no agreement on how much the Pathways program is supposed to cost and how much of a split industry and government are going to contribute in order to build it out. They estimated, the 5 big oil companies that are part of the Pathways plan estimated that it would cost $16.5 billion in 2022. Everything gets more expensive with time.
Yep.
Everything that you need to build, the materials have gotten more expensive. We know the price of a lot of things is going up. We have this trade issue with the United States. So I imagine that estimate, and it's just an estimate, will be higher the next time the government provides one, but they're not providing an estimate at all. And I think that's worrying. And just a final idea, Tom, is that what holds, we call it a bargain, it's an agreement. What holds these companies to this agreement? If they don't capture as much carbon and store it as they promise to, or as they anticipate that they will, what is the penalty for them? There isn't one. And so there are a lot of worrying signs about how this is rolling out.
And the public could be on the hook for a project that doesn't work very well. And I think you've made some comments about this technology or this process itself being a little bit unfounded or unproven. Can you just illustrate the concern a little bit?
Yeah. So there are a few issues with carbon capture and storage. One big issue with it is that it kind of takes our focus away from what the problem is. The problem is too much carbon emissions, too much CO2 in the atmosphere. As much as carbon capture and storage might be able to reduce some emissions. 20% of what we emit from industry comes from the actual harvesting of things like oil and gas, but 80% comes from consuming it, from burning it. 80% of the total. So no matter how much carbon and capture storage you do, you're not addressing the root of the problem, because the majority of whatever gets taken out through the production is going to be burned. It's going to be consumed. And that's where most of the pollution comes from. So carbon capture and storage is a little bit of a diversion away from, I think, a better overall climate policy. Other problems with carbon capture and storage, among others, is that it costs a lot of money, as we know. It uses itself a lot of energy in order to be developed and to run. And it's just right now, 0.5% of emissions in Canada are captured by carbon capture and storage. 0.5%. Let's be really generous and say that this could triple or quadruple that through pathways. I mean, we're still nowhere near getting to net zero with that kind of emissions. So I think carbon capture and storage has its promise, but it's just not nearly enough of what we need if we're actually serious about our targets.
Yeah. Okay. Well, thanks, Desmond, for helping us kind of wrap our heads around what is the center of this problem, because I think for a lot of people watching the story, it's operates at the level of politics, but not really understanding what's below that. So thank you very much. And you've been
Could
doing
I add
some coverage
one
on
really
this.
quick thing? Sorry.
Yeah, of course.
Something new in the spring economic update was that the government of Mark Carney announced that it wants to give tax credits for something called CCUS. We've been talking about CCS, carbon capture and storage. CCUS is carbon capture, utilization, and storage. And what the utilization part essentially boils down to is taking carbon dioxide that you're capturing from an industrial project and actually pumping it back into an oil project to help with the pressure to produce more oil. So the
Sort of like
government
fracking.
is but with carbon that's been captured already, and the government is now saying it's going to subsidize this. So what we're actually doing is subsidizing oil companies to produce more of the thing that is creating the environmental problem that we're trying to stop. And so the incentives for a lot of what Mark Carney has introduced here are really problematic, to say the least.
Yeah. All right. Well, yeah. Thank you for raising all these issues and helping us focus on the things that are problematic here, so we can watch them over the next while. Your outfit, The Breach, you also have a podcast, right? And people can find that podcast on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and all those kind of places.
That's correct. Anywhere you listen to them.
Right. Well, good. And I think it's every second week you put something out. So folks who are watching, maybe right after you tap the follow button for Lefties to West, of course, head over to the Breach podcast and give that one a follow too, and listen in to Desmond talking about the issues that the Breach is always raising for us. So thanks very much, Des.
It's a pleasure. Thanks. See you later.
Let's take a quick break, and we'll be right back with Shauna. We're pleased to welcome Shauna Sylvester to the show this week. She's a senior fellow of the Definity Foundation, founder and lead convener of Urban Climate Leadership, a project of Makeway. So welcome to Lefties to West, Shauna.
Thanks, Tom. It's great to be here.
Thank you. You've got a impressive career as a convener and a policy leader. You ran for Vancouver mayor, and we want to talk about that in a minute, but a big focus for you now is the urban climate leadership. Tell us about that and how this flows from your interest in municipal government and policy.
Thanks, Tom. Actually, I think urban climate leadership is the culmination of 40 years of working in this space. And I started, I'm aging myself, but I started in early 80s, really doing a lot of facilitation and convening, research, policy work, lobbying, advocacy. And I think what I learned from all of those years is that while it wasn't easy, it was fairly straightforward to do the research and come up with prescriptions for change. It was extremely hard to get to implementation.
Yeah.
So, Urban Climate Leadership was created. It's a project of Makeway Charitable Society, and it was created with uh, three foundations to really support cities where they're having a struggle in overcoming the obstacles on equitable climate action.
Mhm.
And the focus is getting the people around the table that all have a piece of the puzzle who could actually come up with some of those solutions and then to work across those private, public, nonprofit sectors to not just come up with the pathway to the solution, but actually get to implementation. And as I said, it's far harder than it looks.
Mhm.
Um, and I'll use the one example is that when I first started, I thought financing was going to be the big issue. And I was looking specifically at the issues of how do you ensure that people don't die in the next heat dome? And particularly concerned with vulnerable residents who are living in 3 and 4 story buildings. And I sat down with the city of Vancouver and I said, is this an issue? Why is it so hard to just get a heat pump into a low rise MURB? And they said, Shauna, this is the biggest challenge. Like this particular building architecture is about as difficult as it comes. And so then when I started to do the research, I realized they were right. It was extremely complicated. And so then that's where we put our first focus. Our
Mhm.
second focus has really been on what we're seeing as a serious emerging issue, which is the role of local governments with AI and data centers and
Mm.
how they navigate their way through those. So those are the things that urban climate leadership works on,
Uh,
helping cities navigate through the really
Interesting.
difficult times. Yeah.
Yeah, it's great. And you ran for mayor of Vancouver in 2018. And so BC is just one of many provinces this fall heading into local government elections. And it feels like a very early start everywhere to that campaign season, which is unusual, but making for interesting politics right now. You've talked before about cities being at the front edge of the climate crisis. How is climate policy faring in cities currently? And can you share any examples of a city that you think is doing climate action well right now?
Thanks, Nikki. And yes, I did run for mayor. It feels like ancient history now, but and yes, those campaigns are starting fast and furiously. We're seeing the Vancouver campaign heat up already. Um, but looking at municipalities and climate change, I was really proud of the work, and I can go back 20 years to the work that we started doing in Vancouver on climate. And I was extremely proud of Vancouver's leadership on
Mhm.
climate policy. It wasn't just climate policy, it was economic policy as well, because
Mm.
Yeah.
through the policies, it then inspired a whole range of new businesses and innovations to emerge here. And I used to facilitate through carbon talks through renewable cities
Mhm.
a number of the dialogues that led to innovations here in Vancouver. And we attracted some of the best and the brightest to the city to lead that climate policy. Recently, we've seen a real backsliding on climate
Mhm.
policy. I in Vancouver, and I know we're seeing it in Edmonton and Calgary and even in Toronto. We're seeing either city councils backsliding or we're seeing state provinces encumber the role of
Right.
municipalities being able to drive their climate policy. So it's a real shift. And some of that, I mean, because I've worked in the United States and I've led Urban Sustainability Directors Network, which is the association for the sustainability staff in cities in Canada and the United States, I know that that is actually a trend and it's a conservative
Right.
trend. It's one of the pages out of the MAGA handbook is stop cities from acting because they're
Right.
closest to the people.
Mm.
I want to take a moment and just, Nikki, if it's okay, I just want to say that cities are on the front line and it's really, and municipalities, and we might not talk about it as climate change. If we remember back in the late 80s, early 90s, and think about our interior communities dealing with pine beetle and the
Mhm.
forestry sector, or farmers really trying to figure out when was the seeding time, or the droughts. Or I think of my own, where I'm from, originally was Nelson, wanting to go back to Nelson, but I don't want to go back to Nelson anymore because the wildfires
Right.
are so much
Right.
expense.
Yeah.
When any of those things happen, it's local governments that people go to. And that,
Mm-hmm.
so cities, municipalities are constantly thinking about how do they serve their residents and protect them over the long term. They're the ones that are seeing the insurance rises. They're the ones that
Yeah.
are seeing that, businesses can't get insurance or flood prone areas can't get insurance in Quebec, for example. So this is a serious issue.
Yeah.
We often forget the municipal piece of this. And
Mm,
that's why I just wanted to put that front and center again. Municipalities are fundamental to climate action. It's why
Mm-hmm.
urban climate leadership focuses there. But of course, municipalities are never working alone. They're working as an order of government. You need multi level climate action. So,
Mm-hmm.
given that I can no longer say that Vancouver is my favorite city on climate action, I mean, I could point to Montreal because they are doing, because they have the alliance of BC, Quebec Hydro. They've got the support of the Montreal or the provincial government. But if I'm coming back home to British Columbia, I'd probably say Victoria is where
Mm.
I'm looking at leadership right
mm,
now. And I'm particularly proud of Victoria and New Westminster because they've just
Nice.
introduced thermal regulations. So,
mm.
Great.
yeah.
Nice.
Well, let's just kind of dive into that mix a little bit more. You've been working on a goal with municipalities. This is a key. They're key in this thing of transitioning a lot of low-rise, multi-residential buildings over to energy-efficient heat pumps. And you've taken a kind of interesting approach to how to do this that I was hoping you could outline for us. Pursuing this is really a kind of an economic strategy that builds a new sector rather than positioning it as, here we are asking for something from government. Um, and this approach has been, you've pulled together some partners in a kind of nascent sector who could scale up to deliver the vision. So tell us about that. And we're talking here about heat pumps in, multi-residential low-rise units, but can this approach, can it be applied to other projects, other issues?
I think it can. So let me explain the approach a little bit more.
Yeah.
We wanted to find a solution that was a systems changing solution. And you
Mm,
can go to government and ask for money, and that's going to get you so far. It's not going to change
Mm-hmm.
the system. And we have, low rise. These are the 3 and 4 story apartments and condominiums are
mhm,
the, in British Columbia and many suburban areas of Canada, they are the most prominent architectural feature we'll see. The most important building form, particularly for affordable houses. Think about where our seniors live, our people living with disabilities, our health center type housing, and you see how prevalent this building form is. So we were
Yeah.
looking for systems change. That's not going to come. If you ask for government money, it's going to
mm,
support the issue at that moment in that time, as long as the government money is there. What we needed to do is develop a much more transformative solution that would unlock private capital. So when we started to look at what would it take in British Columbia, I'm working with over 250 business leaders, financiers, um, uh, all the housing providers that we have here in the built form, and the concierges that help navigate folks through, and the workers that are doing the contracting,
mhm,
have them all at the table and said, okay, so what's the
mhm.
solution? And one of the things I realized in British Columbia, we have a sleeping giant here. We have an economic development strategy here that is very, very exciting and unconventional. We often think dig in the ground, resources, that's
Right.
what's going to
Mm-hmm.
deliver economic wealth. Actually, look at the retrofit industry. So we
Yeah.
presented an offering to the provincial government that says with an investment through loan reserves, through some investment in workforce training, a little bit of money to inspire the manufacturing and innovation sector, and a little bit for the concierges, we can unlock 1.5 billion in private capital. We can create 19,000 new good long-term green jobs. We can really reinforce what is a nascent because we don't see it. Doesn't mean it's not
Mm-hmm.
powerful municipal manufacturing and innovation sector.
Mhm,
One example, Shark Energy here, a BC-based, actually Metro Vancouver-based company, 400% growth. These are a heat pump manufacturer.
Yeah.
400% growth this year, at least 400% projected next year. But we don't
Wow.
know about them. We had to go searching for this manufacturing sector, which is actually there. The rest of the world knows about it. We don't. This is a competitive advantage for BC. And if you start to think of the electricity, the clean electricity, we can actually buy, and I'm going to get a little bit in the weeds, by transforming electric baseboard heated low-rise apartments and condominiums to energy efficient heat pumps, we can save 1.5 billion in not having to build out electricity through more dams. So think of it. We had in BC, we had 619 people die in 2020 at one heat dome just by transitioning 5,000 buildings to energy efficient heat pumps. We can save 20 million in those heat related hospitalization costs. So this is a win economic strategy that I think is the way we need to be thinking about how we solve some of these intractable challenges that we have, because it took us 2 years to figure it out. I'll be honest, when we sat down and I did the first research, I would never have known that there was this sleeping giant here of an economic powerhouse for BC. And I'm really excited about what it could mean for our province.
Yeah, and it's interesting. I think, and we talked about the Prime Minister Carney's speech in Vancouver a couple of weeks ago as well, and heat pumps came up, and him talking about the energy transition in that big speech. We're seeing other jurisdictions look at some of these changes in response to the war in Iran. Like, these are not issues that are not, they're now dominating a bit, I think, and people starting to see them as a shift. So I think it's all very interesting and well timed.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
And building on that, I think, it is those things where talking about something like heat pumps as an economic driver, we probably wouldn't have had 18 months ago. And we have seen in the last 18 months, some of the fastest shifts in government policy direction in decades. But at the same time, it does feel like sometimes that governments are a little bit less open to new policy approaches that could be providing some of these innovative solutions to geopolitical pressures, or sort of going back to some of the old systems versus looking at something that could be a new approach or drive a new sector. So you've taken a role of convener much of your career. How do you see this role of stakeholders in helping governments find policy solutions, and sort of what are the barriers that you've encountered in that?
I think the days, and we probably remember from the 80s and 90s, the arrogance of government sort of driving everything, right? And I think those days are definitely over. Government doesn't have the resources to be able to solve the problems that citizens expect them to solve. So the whole idea of convening and really bringing the players together that can support real change, grounding that in place is really important. And I actually think facilitation and convening is something that is within the DNA of Canadians, to be quite honest. And I think I come out of a foreign policy background, and it's the role we would often play in the international arena. So I've worked in that space globally for many, many years. I know when I see something unique in a space when I'm convening. So I'm looking for, is there a high level of social capital? Meaning that, is there a lot of connection? Is there a way that I can see this group moving to deliver? That's a really important piece. So with the heat pump thing, in all my years, 40 years of convening and facilitating, I had never seen such high capital, social capital among a group. And so I knew that there was something in BC that was unique that can be built upon. That's the kind of thing that we have to see government looking for. I think that there's a lot more that government needs to do to actually open themselves. I also want to take a moment to defend our electeds, because I think that there's a risk adversity for a good reason that many electeds and senior civil servants are feeling. And that's coming because, let's be honest, we've seen a lot of attacks, intentional attacks on our public service, misinformation, real disrespect of that role in public service. And I think that there's a role for all of us to play to lift each other up, especially protect our public servants, because they are working really hard on our behalf. And I mean that across political sector, political ideologies. I just think that we need to create the conditions that take the pressure off them having to deliver on everything and give them a chance to be a participant in the creation of alternatives, in the creation. And so when we're doing that, it's really, really important that as we're looking at all the players that have a piece of the puzzle are at the table. So the people on the front line, the workers, those that are communicating, the narrative builders, all of them are at that table trying
Yeah.
to really grapple with the difficult issues. So you have to create safety in those spaces to enable
Yeah.
people to actually take their hats off and look at the issues in a collaborative way. That's not an easy thing to do.
Mm.
It sounds easier than it is.
Yeah, I wanted to touch on another kind of transformation idea that you worked on in the past. I think this is not your present work, but Canada's World, which was kind of an interesting take on, or the way I read it, an interesting take on foreign policy and kind of challenging myths about Canada, this kind of old narrative, which is, no doubt still taken as true in some parts of the world, that just sees our country as some, little mini offshoot of French and British empires, not as our own thing, which of course includes those colonial histories, but it's
Yeah.
far, far deeper, and I'd say, you know, way more interesting. But Canada's World seemed to be this effort to try and tell our story in a way that bolsters our international reputation, um, in order to improve international relationships and opportunities. So that just seems so massive. How do you proceed on a task like that? And do you think that task, that kind of approach of repositioning or helping people re-understand Canada, is more urgent in the MAGA area, in the MAGA era?
Eh, Thanks for raising Canada's world economy because I came out of my first 25 years was in foreign policy, international, global
Hmm.
issues. And one of the things that I had noticed, and this was in the first years of the Harper administration, is that Canada had a new nickname. You know, we had always been the group that you wanted to convene and
Hmm.
facilitate sessions. And all of a sudden, I was coming back from meetings with friends who had been part of the international environment and human rights consultations. They said, Canada's got a new nickname. And I said, what is it? And they said, it's a little bush. And I said, what does
Oh,
that mean?
Oh,
yeah, there's that one too. Yeah,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah.
Yeah,
just
we were
little
in the
Americans.
plant. Yeah.
That's in
Adorned
way.
the conference room corner, didn't say anything, but when we did, we were a little bush,
Yeah,
which was,
yeah.
a reference
Yes. Yeah.
to Bush Jr., right? So that was that kind of hit me. And I realized that we were still kind of resting on these laurels of we were these peace builders. And what we needed to do in Canada was to develop a narrative based on who we were as now as a country, not who we were 50 years ago. And so it was the largest engagement of Canadians in a foreign
Mm.
policy discussion ever.
Mhm.
And I think there were 250,000 people involved in that
Yeah.
conversation in some
Wow.
or another right across the country. Um, I think what's important about that conversation right now is that, I mean, I may not agree with what Prime Minister um, Carney is doing right now on climate. In fact, I don't. But what I will do is give him big marks, high marks for his approach to foreign policy. He recognizes that not only do we bring our interests to the international arena, we bring our assets and our values. That's pretty critical. He understands what it is to pursue a middle power initiative.
Hmm.
He understands that what we need to bring into that international arena is those relationships. So, yes, our resources are important. Those are among our assets. But more importantly, is that we have a globally connected population. We have connections and intelligence about the rest of the world that very few countries have to the same way that we
Hmm.
do. And what we need to do in bringing that to the international fora is we need to show up in those multilateral fora and ask for a rules-based international arena. We need to build those relationships. I could never have imagined that Canada would have pivoted back as closely to Europe and to our
Yeah.
other multilateral fora as fast as we have. And I do have to give credit to Prime Minister Carney for doing that. He understands what it is to maneuver in multilateral fora. That's a rare thing. And we've seen it with some of our better leaders in the past, and we're seeing it now. I wish, of course, that he would see that in the climate context as well. And I'm hoping somewhere along the way he is, but I don't hold out a lot of hope. Now,
Mm.
in relationship, because you brought up Megan, and I've spent some of my time in the United States, and I think we have to take the expansionism very, very seriously. I do believe MAGA is unhinged. I do believe that there is this absolute immaturity in understanding what global politics are like, and that what has been enabled in the States is what I would call the worst of the worst of political machinations. But if we think for a second we're protected in Canada here, I think we are being deeply naive. And I think that the Prime Minister knows and understands that. So if I start to put that hat on, I think that every decision that's to be happening right now is how do we bolster ourselves against a U.S. intervention. I think that we have potentials within Alberta through the separatist thing, that's an inroad.
Yeah.
I think the North is an inroad. I spend some of my time in Point Roberts. I can tell you that ICE is alive and well, and surveillance is alive and well. We won't get into my own personal situation, but it's how you maneuver through MEG is a really, really fascinating conversation itself.
Yeah, and I think when we need to be having and are going to be having for a long time, but not, I don't think, getting enough depth yet in Canada for sure. We're going to do a little pivot here into housing policy, where you've also had a strong focus, and particularly around inequity in housing policy, and housing continues, poll after poll, we're seeing housing still continuing to be a top concern for the public, at least in the top 3 across the country, particularly in some jurisdictions where they're more expensive. But of course, to move anything on housing requires significant policy levers and stakeholder buy-in. I think we sort of see governments be able to move so far and then move back, or try to get in line with where stakeholders are at and what they need. And then I think right now we're really seeing a lot of shifts as well for housing markets and for those involved in the sector. So where do you see decision makers actually getting traction on housing policy changes?
Well, I think I want to call out one city in particular. And if you're from British Columbia, you'll know that there was a time, because of some municipal bylaws, that the city of Burnaby became this disaster area for housing. I mean, it might have been good for those building big skyscrapers, but because of a municipal bylaw, we saw the biggest dislocation of population in the history of Canada. Just when you think about it, that's saying something. And that dislocation came through rent evictions and dem evictions, as we saw so many of these low-rise MURBs be destroyed and people displaced. So a city, Burnaby, which I lived in growing up, that never had a housing problem, began to have a very serious housing problem. Well, Mayor Mike Hurley got elected in 2018, and he got elected on a housing that he was going to change that situation. And he asked me to facilitate his mayor's task force on affordable housing, around community housing. And I remember at the time, because I had facilitated the previous one in 2012 in Vancouver, I'd learned a lot from that process. That's one where we focused on building forms, and there were so many things I wish we had done differently. So when I sat down with Mayor Hurley, I said, I have 3 conditions in saying yes on this. I said, the first is that you don't focus on building forms, like what kind of housing you're going to build. You focus on the needs of the people of Burnaby, so that everything in your policy meets those needs. The second thing you do is that because you've got this problem of rent evictions and dem evictions, you've got a citizen, it's almost shell shocked in what's happened in this. Now, there's got to be a deep engagement with citizens in terms of refining that narrative. And I brought colleagues from the Center for Dialogue who really know how to do that work into that conversation. And I said, the third thing is, if you do this, you got to see it through, but at the end of it, within 2 years, you need to bring those players back together to evaluate your progress. To my surprise, and I really think it says a lot about Mayor Hurley, he said yes. And then he brought the most exceptional planning staff to the table. The city of Burnaby staff, I can't say enough good things about them. And we worked really, really hard for a 7-month period through that. And we had really, we had the big developers at the table. We had the tenants' rights advocates, Acorns and others at the table. We had the workers and the labor unions. We had people who had been dem evicted all at the table. And then we had the citizens' dialogue. It was kind of a tango dance between the task force and the citizens' process, some taking leadership from the others at different stages. the policies that came out of Burnaby through that, I think are some of the best housing policies in the
Hmm.
country. The first time we really got a strong tenants relocation policy in play, really brought in really strong policies that today have been models for others. And so that would be the city where I think I would look to. I know that there's been some really good work in Montreal, definitely some good work in Toronto and other communities around the country. But that's the one I'm closest to and
Yeah.
excited by.
Yeah,
It
sure.
sounds like a model others could use as well. Yeah.
It was one of those ones where a city said, we don't have all the, we're not going to try and solve this on our own.
Yeah.
We're really going to, it was authentic engagement. And, again, that comes to leadership and
Mhm.
I have to again commend Mayor Hurley. And you know what? He ran the next time. Nobody ran against him.
Yeah.
Good politics
Says
is good
something about
policy
the
sometimes. Yeah.
nature of governance.
Yeah.
You can govern differently. You
Yeah.
can bring in concert with your communities in a more
Mhm.
engaged way. And I think that is the future.
Shauna, listening to you, it seems to me there's underpinning a lot of your work is some sort of theory of change. Um, where do you think change happens? Where do you think it most effectively comes from? Running for City Hall, engaging people. I'm hearing a lot of different themes in what you're talking about. Just explore that. What is your theory of change?
Well, and I won't get too academic,
Yes. Keep it to under 4 hours.
but so I will say that I don't think power is monolithic. I
Mhm.
actually believe that there are many ways in which power is constituted and reconstituted on a daily basis.
Mhm.
And so I'm always looking for those spaces, those social, those political, cultural, economic spaces where you can apply pressure and create a systemic change. So that's sort of in broad strokes my belief in theory of change. But what does that mean in practical at implementation level? It means that the contractor matters. The farmer matters,
Mhm.
that you start to look at all of the players that bring a piece of that change to play. Like you've got to have those that are thinking broadly, visionary. You need to have the communicators. You need the artists that can bring about different ways of thinking and knowing, that can challenge stereotypes. You need people with frontline lived experience that can speak to what it's like. You need people and not one of the things I've learned as a facilitator, there's only about 20% of us that feel really comfortable thinking about the future.
Mhm.
You need those futurists who can see a different way, who can lead. You need disruptors. I realize I spend so much of my time in institution protecting disruptors because there's nothing an institution hates more than somebody that's disrupting all the time. And disruptors can be very divergent in their thinking. Protect them. You've got to have them in the room. So for me, my theory of change is highly relational. I spend more of my time in conversations helping to keep people seeing where are they moving to? What's that North Star? What's that pressure point they're trying to apply so that they can create and apply that pressure in a way that's going to create the change that they want. And it tends to be a little laborious at times, but it's actually from a cultural, social, economic perspective, it's actually really exciting work and can go somewhere. So keeps me going.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I feel like it's energizing and hopeful work as well, and having the pleasure of seeing you in action at different points in the last couple of decades as well. I get that from that process too. So it's all very appreciated. Thanks for joining us today, Shauna. We really appreciate you taking time out of your very busy schedule and joining the show. And maybe we'll have you back at some point in the future. These are important conversations for the country and lots of models here that could be pulled out and applied. So we're going to take a break and come back with Love It or Heave It.
Thanks so much.
Before we wrap up, we've come to the part of the show that we call Love It or Heave It, about something that one of us loves and wants to keep, or something we'd like to heave and forget forever. What do you have this week, Tom?
Well, Nikki, I am loving watching and rewatching Bob Canoe publicly calling out Daniel Smith on what he called her fake framing of a recent court decision. Smith said that a court had ruled that her separatist petition gatherers had a duty to consult First Nations, and that decision was obviously a faulty decision. Seems she'd said that in private too, and clearly Bob Canoe privately corrected her. But in a kind of a rude move, she repeated this fake take in public in front of Canoe and her fellow premiers, I guess thinking that everybody would just say nothing and let this brazen lie just float out there unrefuted. But Canoe pointed out the court did not find the duty to consult fell on the separatist movement. It fell on her UCP government. It fell on her, and she did not do it. So the only person responsible for the court tossing out the petitioner's question was Daniel Smith. And so karma's a bit of a bitch there, isn't it? It was a pretty brutal takedown in a week when polls showed Federalist voters shifting from the UCP to the NDP, leaving separatists outnumbering Federalists about 2-1 amongst UCP supporters. So increasingly becoming the separatist party, and the NDP aligning as the Federalist Party. And according to that same Angus Reid poll released last week, the parties are statistically tied now, UCP 46, Alberta NDP 45. So for years, Smith has been stoking the threat of separatism higher to leverage even higher, more lucrative deals for oil and gas companies, mostly foreign, often using her fake facts, framing them to mobilize the haters to carry your message. So for me, seeing that cynical strategy so publicly hit the wall of WOB was the honesty that we deserve and need more of if we really love this country.
Yeah, it was, I think, really great, I think, to watch the Western Premiers Conference as well, and just see the premiers from Canoe to Eby to others, I think, be so strong on that Team Canada approach again. And just kind of a wild time for them to all head to Kananaskis for Western Premiers this last week. So
they were good. Eby and Canoe were good. And the interesting thing was Scott Moe's like, I'm barely even here.
Yeah, I noticed that.
Like,
or I don't want to be here for this conversation.
Yeah, I think I got my canola deal, and I'm gonna hide now. So
yeah,
what about you?
Fly in the wall for that one.
Yeah, what about you? Loving or eating this week?
I am loving that the spring session of the BC legislature has finally wrapped up, along with the BC Conservative leadership race. I think the overlap between those two has really created some difficult moments in BC, strained relationships, shaken trust, really increased misinformation and narratives that I think have even spilled into the national conversation. Now we're seeing more and more. So particularly around where we've seen public concern and confusion growing around issues like private property rights in the context of the Declaration of the Rights of Indigenous People Act being leveled into this sort of political fray, and then the relationship into the legislature where talk of amendments and ongoing discussions with First Nations leaders and government were the dominating piece here, no matter, I think, how much the government tried to switch the agenda into jobs and major projects and economic growth. So, add into that really highly troubling moments like the use of a slogan associated with Nazi Germany on the floor of the legislature by an MLA. And I think, and many other times where I think being in the legislature was challenging for people at moments, and sort of hearing where discourse is getting to, it's clear. I think this has just been the first 6 months of the year have been very fraught and negative for BC politics. And it hasn't just been the politics. I think, it was a tough budget, like many provinces, tough stakeholder, complex management after it, really increasing pressures on all types of sectors, from affordability issues and governments cutting back on programs and funding. So I think, it's made for a long year. We're not even halfway through it. And then, of course,
June.
It's only June. It's only, we've just got through this, and now we're into this whole new phase. And I will flag that we're recording before we have the BC Conservative leadership vote. But that has been an added pressure, I think, into having multiple candidates really trying to drive issues to win that leadership, particularly around Indigenous rights and DRIPA. So as we come back, we've got a few months here, which I think is important. They don't come back until October now. This is heavy constituency time, getting into planning, caucus retreats, and of course, for a Conservative Party, a new leader, probably new critics, new strategy, new staff, all of the things being new to give them a time to figure out what their party stands for when they've got that new leader in there. So I think, summer matters. I think it's going to be an important time for all parties to reflect on the last 6 months and how they managed to navigate or didn't some of these complex issues. But I think most importantly, how they'll participate in sort of cutting down the disinformation and the political noise, because, no matter who is in government here, having these challenging narratives, particularly around Indigenous rights, doesn't serve anyone very well. Not only on the economic front and certainty, but also, and what we've talked about before on the show in terms of increases in anti-Indigenous hate. And so there's a role here for rebuilding relationships this summer, and I think getting regrounded in values kind of across the board.
Yeah. Well, you've heard from Nikki and me. We're both loving things this week. That's good news. So you can email us at lefteastowest@gmail.com. And let's talk about what you're loving or eating. And also remember to tap the follow button on your podcast player. Make sure that you get a reminder of our next show on next Monday with Stefan Löfven, former Prime Minister of Sweden and current president of the Party of European Socialists. And in the weeks after, we have Jim Stanford and Carla Beck joining us. So you won't want to miss that. So Nikki, have a great week. And we'll see you
too,
next.
Tom.
All right. Take care.
Thanks for joining Left East to West with hosts Nikki Hill and Tom Parkin. We love to hear your comments, ratings, follows, and shares. It helps people find us. To become a Left East to West community member and to help us reach even more Canadians, subscribe using the link in the show notes. You can watch us on YouTube or listen wherever you get your favorite podcasts. Just search for Left East to West and subscribe. I'm Doug Hamilton signing off for Left East to West. We'll see you next week.